The stagecoach lurched to a stop just as the last rays of sunlight bled into the horizon, painting Cedar Falls in shades of rust and shadow. Clara May Elliston gripped the worn leather handle above her head, waiting for the dust to settle before gathering her courage to step down. Her joints protested after 3 days of bone-rattling travel through mountain passes. But she straightened her spine, a habit born from years of being told she slouched too much for a lady. The driver, a grizzled man with tobacco-stained teeth, didn't offer his hand as she descended. His eyes traveled up her frame, lingering on how her head nearly brushed the coach roof even while seated. Clara had grown accustomed to such looks. At 5 feet and 11 inches, she towered over most women and stood eye to eye with many men, a fact that had shaped her life in ways both subtle and profound. Cedar Falls revealed itself through the settling dust, a main street of packed earth flanked by weathered storefronts, their painted signs fading like old memories. The general store, a saloon called the Silver Dollar, a barber shop with its striped pole still as death in the windless evening. And there, at the street's end, stood Holbrook's Inn, 2 stories of sun-bleached timber that leaned slightly eastward, as if yearning for morning light. Clara lifted her single carpet bag, its weight familiar yet somehow heavier tonight. Inside, wrapped in her spare dress, lay the last of her savings, $7.43, enough for 2 nights' lodging, maybe 3 if she could negotiate. After that, well, she'd learned not to think too far ahead. Life had a way of mocking such plans. The inn's door groaned on rusted hinges as she pushed inside. The common room sprawled before her, thick with the smell of coal oil, boiled beef, and the peculiar musk of men who lived more outdoors than in. A few heads turned at her entrance, conversations trailing off mid-sentence. Clara kept her gaze steady, neither inviting nor avoiding their stares. She'd learned that showing discomfort only made things worse. Behind the desk stood Mr. Holbrook himself, she assumed by his proprietorial air, and the stained apron stretched across his considerable belly. His eyes widened slightly as she approached, taking in her travel-worn appearance, the gray wool dress that had once been blue, the boots cracked from too many miles, the bonnet that couldn't quite contain her dark hair, now streaked with road dust. "Evening, sir," Clara said, setting her bag down with practiced care. "I'd like a room, please, just myself." Holbrook's mouth worked silently for a moment, as if chewing on words before spitting them out. "Well now, Miss, or is it Mrs.? Miss Elliston." She'd dropped the Mrs. months ago, along with other remnants of her failed marriage. "Miss Elliston." He glanced around the room, perhaps hoping for guidance from the handful of patrons nursing their drinks. "Thing is, we're mighty particular about maintaining a certain reputation. Cedar Falls is a respectable town, and—" "I have money." Clara placed her coins on the scarred wooden counter, the metal singing a small, desperate song. "I need only a clean bed and privacy. I'll cause no trouble." Holbrook's gaze flickered between her face and the money, calculating. She could see him weighing profit against propriety, trying to categorize her too tall to be a proper lady, too plainly dressed to be a woman of means, traveling alone with no wedding ring. The mathematics of respectability rarely worked in her favor. "It ain't about trouble," he said slowly. "It's just that, well, a woman alone, and one of your unusual stature. Folks might talk, might wonder what kind of establishment I'm running." Heat crept up Clara's neck, but she kept her voice level. "I assure you, Mr. Holbrook, I'm merely seeking shelter for the night. I've traveled far and—" "That's just it," he interrupted, warming to his theme now. "Traveled far from where to do what you got family here a position waiting." His questions pecked at her like hungry birds, each one designed to prove she didn't belong. Clara's fingers tightened on her purse strings. She could lie, invent a cousin or a teaching position, but fatigue had worn her deception thin. "I'm seeking employment. I'm skilled with needle and thread, and I can read and cipher. Surely an honest woman looking for honest work deserves. A chair scraped against the floor, the sound sharp as a gunshot in the tense air. From the room's darkest corner, a figure unfolded itself, tall, lean, moving with the particular economy of someone who'd learned not to waste motion. The man stepped into the lamplight, and Clara glimpsed weathered leather, faded denim, and a face that might have been carved from the same stone as the mountains she'd just crossed. He moved to the counter without hurry, spurs singing a quiet metallic hymn with each step. When he reached past Clara to set a handful of bills beside her coins, she caught the scent of horse and leather, sage and something indefinable, perhaps simply the smell of wide-open spaces. "Give her the room upstairs," he said, voice low and rough as creek gravel. "I'll take the barn." Holbrook's protest died unspoken. There was something in the cowboy's stance not threatening, exactly, but final, like a fence post driven deep. The innkeeper's hands moved of their own accord, scooping up the money and reaching for a key from the board behind him. Clara turned to face her unexpected benefactor, words of refusal ready on her tongue, but he was already moving away, hat pulled low, dismissing her gratitude before she could voice it. At the door, he paused just long enough to glance back. Their eyes met across the smoky room, hers dark as coffee, his the pale blue of winter sky. "I don't need charity," Clara said, loud enough to carry, but not so loud as to make a scene. The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile. Didn't offer any, just evening the scales a bit. Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft finality. Holbrook cleared his throat, suddenly eager to complete the transaction. "Room's at the top of the stairs, last door on the right. Breakfast is at 6, dinner at 7. We don't serve meals in rooms, and we don't tolerate any entertaining." Clara took the key, its weight both lighter and heavier than she'd expected. "I wouldn't dream of it, Mr. Holbrook." She gathered her bag and made for the stairs, aware of eyes following her progress. The steps creaked under her boots, each sound seeming to announce her presence, her difference, her aloneness. But she'd grown used to being a spectacle. What she hadn't grown used to was kindness from strangers, especially those who asked nothing in return. The room proved small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the stable yard. Clara set her bag on the room's sole chair and moved to the window, drawn by the sound of horses below. There, in a pool of lantern light, she saw him, the cowboy who'd paid for her room. He worked with quiet efficiency, settling his horse for the night. Movements sure despite the gathering darkness. Luke Carver. She'd learn his name later. But that night, he was simply the man who'd looked at her and seen something other than an oddity or a problem to be solved. He'd seen someone who needed help and had provided it without fuss or expectation, a rarity in Clara's experience. As she watched, another figure emerged from the inn's back door. A boy, perhaps 12, carrying a steaming mug. The cowboy accepted it with a nod, and Clara realized with a start that it must be cold in the barn. Cold, while she had a warm room he'd paid for. She turned from the window, suddenly exhausted by the weight of the day, the journey, the constant need to justify her existence. Tomorrow she would look for work, would face more scrutiny and polite rejections. But tonight, for the first time in weeks, she had a door she could close and lock, a bed that didn't move with the rhythm of wheels or hooves. On the windowsill, she noticed something that hadn't been there before, or perhaps she'd simply missed it in her initial survey. A small tin cup, still warm to the touch, filled with tea, chamomile. By the smell? No note, no explanation. But Clara knew, with a certainty that surprised her, who had left it. She sipped the tea slowly, letting its warmth spread through her chest. Outside, the lights of Cedar Falls began to wink out one by one, the town settling into sleep. Somewhere below, in a cold barn, slept a man who'd given up comfort for principle, who'd acted not from pity, but from simple decency. Clara May Elliston had been many things in her 31 years daughter. Wife, seamstress, traveler. She'd been called too tall, too plain, too strange, too much. But tonight, in a room she couldn't afford in a town that didn't want her, she was simply a woman drinking tea, grateful for the unexpected grace of a stranger's kindness. And for now, that was enough. Morning came sharp and bright to Cedar Falls, the kind of light that revealed every flaw and virtue in equal measure. Clara woke to the sound of roosters and the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer, her body stiff from the first real rest she'd had in weeks. The events of the previous evening felt distant, dreamlike, until she saw the empty teacup on the windowsill, proof that kindness had indeed found her in this unlikely place. She dressed carefully in her better dress, a brown calico that had survived the journey with more dignity than its owner. Her fingers worked through her hair with practiced efficiency, pinning it into a severe bun that might make her height less noticeable. It never did, but old habits died hard. The common room buzzed with morning activity when she descended. Men hunched over plates of beans and biscuits, their conversation a low rumble, punctuated by the scrape of forks on tin. Several glanced up at her entrance, their expressions ranging from curiosity to something less friendly. Clara kept her chin level and made for an empty table near the window. "Coffee." The serving girl couldn't have been more than 16, with freckles scattered across her nose like stars. She stared at Clara with the frank fascination of youth. "Yes, please, and whatever breakfast costs the least." The girl, Mary, by her wooden name tag, nodded and scurried away, but not before whispering something to another patron. Clara pretended not to notice. She'd learned that acknowledging whispers only made them louder. She was halfway through a plate of tough biscuits and salted pork when a shadow fell across her table. Looking up, she found herself meeting those same pale blue eyes from the night before. The cowboy, she still didn't know his name, stood with his own plate, hesitating. "Mind if I sit? Other tables are full." They weren't. 3 stood empty near the door, but Clara gestured to the chair across from her, curious despite herself. He folded his long frame into the seat with the same economy of movement she'd noticed before. Up close, in daylight, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the silver threading through dark hair at his temples, not old, but worn by sun and wind into something like agelessness. They ate in silence for several minutes. Clara found it oddly comfortable, this shared quiet. Most men felt compelled to fill silence with words, especially around women. This one seemed content to let it be. Finally, she set down her fork. "I should thank you for last night." He shook his head slightly. "No need. There's every need. You gave up a warm room for being. I've slept in worse places than Holbrook's barn. Still got all my fingers and toes this morning, so I reckon I came out ahead." Clara studied him, trying to parse the logic. "You don't know me. I could be anyone. A thief, a confidence woman." The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "Are you?" "No." "Then we're square." She wanted to argue, to insist on repaying him, to establish the clear boundaries that kept her safe from obligation. But something in his manner, calm, unjudging, made her hold her tongue. "Luke Carver," he said suddenly, as if remembering his manners. "Clara May Elliston." She waited for the inevitable questions about her husband, her family, her reasons for being alone. They didn't come. Instead, he finished his coffee and stood. "You looking for work?" "Yes, I'm skilled with..." "Mrs. Dolores Abernathy runs the dress shop on 2nd Street. Her arthritis has been acting up. Mike could use help." He set his hat on his head, touching the brim in a gesture that might have been farewell. "Tell her Luke sent you. She owes me for fixing her roof last winter." Before the Clara could respond, he was gone, leaving her with a peculiar feeling in her chest, part gratitude, part bewilderment, part something else she couldn't name. She found the dress shop an hour later. A narrow building squeezed between the land office and a boarded-up assayer's. The painted sign reading "Fine Dresses and Alterations" had seen better days. But the windows were clean and the step freshly swept. The bell above the door announced her entry into a world of fabric and thread. Bolts of cloth lined the walls, calicos and muslins. A few precious silks, while a cutting table dominated the center of the room. Behind it stood a woman bent with age but still commanding, her gray hair pinned beneath a lace cap. Mrs. Abernathy." The woman looked up, eyes sharp behind wire spectacles. "Dolores will do. You the giant everyone's talking about." Heat flooded Clara's cheeks. "I suppose I might be—" "Don't look so fearsome to me. You so—" "Yes, ma'am, since I was small." The irony of the phrase wasn't lost on either woman. Dolores gestured to a basket in the corner. "Show me!" Clara selected a torn shirt from the pile. Examining the damage, a three-corner tear, the kind that wanted to pull apart further with each washing, without asking for thread. She went to the supply cabinet, selected a matching color, and began to work. Her fingers moved with the unconscious grace of long practice, creating tiny, nearly invisible stitches that would hold the fabric without puckering. "Where'd you learn that stitch?" "My mother, she was a seamstress in Philadelphia before she married." "Philadelphia?" Dolores said it like she was tasting something foreign. "Long way from here." "Yes, ma'am." Clara finished the repair and held it up for inspection. Dolores took the shirt, tugged at the mend, held it to the light. Her expression gave nothing away. "Luke Carver sent you. He mentioned you might need help." "That boy." Dolores shook her head, but Clara caught the fond exasperation in her tone. "Fixes my roof, won't take payment, then sends me workers like he's doing me another favor." "I don't need charity," Clara said quickly. "If you don't need help—" "Didn't say that." Dolores set the shirt aside. "My hands aren't what they were. Been turning away mending work, and Mrs. Henderson's been taking her business to Millerton because I can't keep up with orders." She studied Clara with those sharp eyes, seeming to weigh more than just sewing skills. "You running from something?" Clara met her gaze steadily. "From someone, but he won't follow me here." "Husband? Was he hurt you?" "Not with his fists." It was more truth than Clara had meant to offer, but something about Dolores invited honesty. The older woman nodded slowly. "Can you start now?" Relief flooded through Clara. Yes, I can." $2 a week plus commission on extra work. You can sleep in the back room if you need. There's a cot and a stove. Can't afford to pay more, but you'll eat regular and learn the trade proper if you don't already know it." Clara's throat tightened. Yesterday she'd had $7 and nowhere to go. Today she had work and a roof. All because a stranger had decided she deserved decency. "That's more than generous, Mrs. Dolores." "Generous nothing. I expect hard work and no dramatics. This is a respectable shop." They spent the morning sorting through the accumulated mending, Dolores explaining her system and the peculiarities of each regular customer. Clara's hands stayed busy while her mind wandered to the cowboy who'd orchestrated this small miracle. Luke Carver. Even his name seemed solid, dependable. It was past noon when the bell chimed again. Clara looked up from the hem she was pinning to find Luke himself in the doorway, a worn leather vest draped over his arm. "Dolores, Miss Elliston." He nodded to each in turn. "What did you tear now?" Dolores scolded. But her hands were gentle as she took the vest. "Caught it on barbed wire pulling a calf out." He shifted slightly, and Clara noticed him favoring his left side. "You hurt," Dolores's voice sharpened. "Just bruised." Dolores tutted and thrust the vest at Clara. "See what you can do with this mess. Man's harder on clothes than a tornado." Clara examined the damage, a long tear along the side seam, but the leather was good quality. Well cared for despite the hard use. She could fix it. make it stronger than before. "I'll need a different needle," she said, "and waxed thread." Luke watched her gather supplies, his expression unreadable. When she sat back down to work, he pulled up a stool nearby, seemingly content to wait. "Don't you have somewhere to be?" Dolores asked. "Ranch doesn't run away if I sit still for an hour." They fell into companionable silence, broken only by the whisper of thread through leather and the occasional directive from Dolores to a customer who wandered in. Clara found herself hyper-aware of Luke's presence, the space he took up, the way he held himself still but ready, like a horse trained to stand. "There." She held up the mended vest. "Should hold now." He took it, examining her work with the same careful attention she'd seen him give his horse the night before. "Good as new. Better, maybe." He reached for his pocket. "What do I owe?" "Same as always." Dolores said, "Nothing. Not after that roof. Roof's been paid for twice over by now." "Not by my accounting." They had the sound of an old argument, worn smooth by repetition. Luke shook his head but didn't press. Instead, he shrugged into the vest and turned to Clara. "Settling in all right?" "Yes, thank you, for everything." He looked uncomfortable with gratitude. She noticed, like he didn't know where to put it. "Just being decent," he said, echoing his words from the night before. After he left, Dolores was quiet for a long while. Then, known that boy since he was 16, rode in here half dead from cold, worked all winter at the livery for food and a place to sleep. Never asked for nothing he didn't earn. "He seems kind." "Kind." Dolores tested the word. "Maybe, or maybe just knows what it's like to need help and be too proud to ask." Clara thought about that through the afternoon, her fingers busy with their familiar work. She thought about pride and kindness, about the fine line between charity and decency, about a man who gave up comfort as easily as breathing, who fixed roofs and expected nothing, who looked at her and saw not a curiosity but simply someone who needed help. That evening, as she prepared the small back room that would be her home, she found something on the doorstep, a bundle wrapped in brown paper. No note attached. Inside a warm shawl, good wool, and a small bag of peppermint tea. She stood in the doorway, holding these gifts for what else could they be, and looked out at the darkening town. Somewhere out there, Luke Carver was going about his business, asking for nothing but time. Time to what? She wondered. But perhaps that was the wrong question. Perhaps the real question was simpler. How did one repay a debt that the creditor refused to acknowledge? She didn't have an answer, but for the first time in months, she had time to figure it out. Time and a place to belong, and the strange, sweet burden of unasked-for kindness. Clara closed the door against the cooling night and set about making tea, her movements measured and calm. Tomorrow there would be more work, more whispers, more adjustments to this new life. But tonight, she had everything she needed: shelter, purpose, and the peculiar comfort of knowing someone in this world thought her worth simple human decency. It wasn't love. It wasn't even friendship. Not yet, but it was something. And for Clara May Elliston, who had learned to expect so little, something was more than enough. The whispers started on Clara's third day at the dress shop. Mrs. Henderson came in for a fitting, took one look at Clara, measuring tape in hand, and declared she'd wait for Dolores. The baker's wife crossed the street rather than walk past the shop window where Clara sat working. Children gathered in small clusters, daring each other to peek inside at the giant lady. Clara kept her head down and her fingers busy. She'd weathered worse storms than small-town gossip, but each snub, each averted gaze, each mother pulling her child closer, they accumulated like dust on a windowsill. Fine, but pervasive. "Don't mind them," Dolores said after the 5th customer in 2 days had found excuses to avoid Clara's assistance. "Folk here are like chickens. One starts squawking about something new, they all join in." "I'm used to it." Clara's needle never paused in its steady rhythm. Being used to something don't make it right. By the end of the week, Clara had learned the rhythms of Cedar Falls. The stage came through on Tuesdays and Fridays. The church bell rang at 7, noon, and 6. And Luke Carver appeared at the shop every few days with something needing repair work gloves with mysteriously torn fingers, a saddlebag with a broken strap, chaps that had encountered unfortunate amounts of barbed wire. "Man's harder on his gear than anyone I've known," Dolores muttered after his 4th visit. Clara said nothing, but she'd begun to suspect the damage wasn't entirely accidental. The tears were too neat, too conveniently placed, as if someone had carefully created work for idle hands. She was contemplating this possibility while walking to the general store when she heard the commotion. A crowd had gathered near the land office, their voices carrying that particular pitch of scandalized excitement. Clara meant to skirt around them. Crowds rarely boded well for her, but then she heard her name. Saw her myself, bold as brass, working in the shop like she belongs there. Mrs. Prudence Weatherby's voice carried like a sermon. "A woman that tall ain't natural. My George says she must have circus blood." "Or worse," another woman added darkly. "You know what they say about women who travel alone." Clara stopped. She should keep walking, should pretend she hadn't heard. That's what she'd done in Philadelphia, in Baltimore, in every town between here and there. But something fatigue, perhaps, or the memory of kindness made her turn around. "Good afternoon, ladies." The cluster of women fell silent, faces flushing with the particular embarrassment of gossips caught in the act. Mrs. Weatherby recovered first, drawing herself up to her full height, still a good 6 inches shorter than Clara. "Miss Elliston, isn't it?" "It is." Clara kept her voice pleasant, neutral. "I couldn't help but overhear. If you have concerns about my presence at Mrs. Abernathy's shop, perhaps you'd care to address them directly." "Well, Mrs. Weatherby glanced at her companions for support. "It's just that Cedar Falls has certain standards. We're a respectable town. And I'm a respectable woman seeking honest work, unless hemming skirts has become scandalous." A few of the younger women tittered nervously. Mrs. Weatherby's face darkened. "It's not about the work. It's about propriety. A woman of your unusual proportions, traveling alone, taking up with, Clara's voice sharpened despite her best efforts. "Everyone knows Luke Carver's been haunting that shop since you arrived. A single woman and a bachelor, conducting business in full view of anyone who cares to look." The words came from behind Clara. She didn't need to turn to recognize Luke's voice, though she'd never heard it carry quite that edge before. He moved to stand beside her, not touching, but close enough that she could feel the solid presence of him. Close enough that the gesture couldn't be misinterpreted. "Luke, Mrs." Weatherby's voice climbed higher. "Surely you can see how this looks?" "I see a woman trying to earn her living and a bunch of hens clucking about things that ain't their concern." He touched the brim of his hat. "Ladies." The dismissal was clear. The women dispersed like dandelion seeds in a strong wind, though Clara knew they'd reassemble elsewhere, their whispers strengthened by this new development. She and Luke stood alone on the street, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows. Clara found herself trembling slightly, though from anger or something else. She couldn't say. "You didn't need to do that." "Didn't do it for you." His voice had returned to its usual quiet rumble. "Did it because Prudence Weatherby's been spreading poison in this town for 20 years? And I'm tired of it." They walked slowly back toward the dress shop, Luke shortening his stride to match hers. It occurred to Clara that he was one of the few men who didn't have to look up at her. The realization brought an odd comfort. "Why?" The question escaped before she could catch it. "Why what?" "Why do you keep helping? The room, the job, the—" She gestured vaguely at the mended items he kept bringing. "I know you're damaging things on purpose." He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. They'd reached the shop, and he stopped at the door, looking not at her but at the horizon where the mountains rose like promises. "You ever break a horse?" The question seemed like a deflection until Clara saw his face serious, thoughtful. "No. Most folks think it's about domination, showing the horse who's boss. But that just makes a broken animal, not a partner." He shifted, weight moving from one foot to the other. "Real training's about trust, showing them that not every hand is raised to hurt, that kindness exists without conditions." Clara's throat tightened. "I'm not a horse, Mr. Carver." "No," he agreed. "But you've got the same look in your eyes, like you're waiting for the blow to fall." She wanted to deny it, to insist she was fine, independent, needing nothing from anyone, but the words wouldn't come, because he was right. She'd spent so long braced for cruelty that kindness felt like a trap. "I'm tired," she said instead. The admission felt huge, dangerous. "Tired of being looked at like I don't belong to this earth." Luke turned to face her fully then, and she saw something in his expression that made her heart skip, not pity, not curiosity, but recognition. "Then maybe it's time someone looks at you like you do." The words hung between them, simple and profound. Clara felt exposed, seen in a way that had nothing to do with her height or her circumstances. It should have frightened her. Instead, she found herself almost smiling. "Is that what you're doing? Looking at me like I belong?" "I'm looking at you like you're Clara May Elliston." He opened the shop door for her. "Seems like that should be enough for anybody." She entered the shop in a daze, barely registering Dolores's knowing look or the pile of new mending that had arrived. Her mind kept circling back to Luke's words, to the radical simplicity of being seen as merely, fully herself. That evening, as she worked by lamplight, she heard familiar footsteps on the back stoop. She opened the door to find Luke standing there, a parcel in his hands. "Not charity," he said before she could speak. "Payment for future mending." Inside the parcel, 3 shirts, all perfectly intact. "These don't need mending." "They will." His mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. "I'm hard on clothes." "Luke." "It's easier," he said quietly. "If you just mend them before they tear, saves time." Clara clutched the shirts, understanding flooding through her. He was giving her work that wasn't work, payment that wasn't charity, help that preserved her pride. It was the strangest kindness she'd ever encountered. "Thank you." He nodded, started to turn away, then paused. "There's a church social Sunday. Potluck dinner after service. You should come." I'm not sure I'd be welcome." "You'll be with me." The words were matter-of-fact, but they rearranged something in Clara's chest. "That makes you welcome enough." After he left, Clara sat for a long time with the shirts in her lap. She thought about broken horses and patient hands, about trust earned in increments, about a man who created tears in his clothes so a woman could maintain her dignity while mending them. She'd told him she was tired of being looked at like she didn't belong to this earth. He'd offered to look at her differently, but sitting there in the lamplight, fingers running over fabric that didn't need her needle, Clara realized something. He already was. Spring arrived in Cedar Falls with little fanfare, just a gradual softening of the air and the appearance of green shoots pushing through mud. Clara had been at the dress shop for 3 months now, her presence shifting from scandal to peculiarity to simple fact. Not acceptance, exactly, but a kind of resigned acknowledgement that the tall woman in the window had become part of the town's landscape. The shop thrived under her careful hands. Word had spread quietly, grudgingly, that Clara May Elliston could work miracles with fabric. She could let out seams so cleverly that a dress looked made for its wearer, could mend tears that seemed invisible, could fashion a collar from scraps that transformed a plain dress into Sunday best. Even those who whispered about her came for her skill. "You've got more work than you can handle," Dolores observed one morning, watching Clara juggle 3 different alterations. "Might need to raise your prices." "The prices are fair," Clara said, pins held between her lips, making her words careful. "That's what matters." Dolores shook her head but smiled. Her arthritis had eased with the warmer weather and Clara's help, and the older woman had taken to spending mornings teaching Clara the finer points of dressmaking, not just mending, but creating from whole cloth. Luke still came by regularly, though his pretense of needing repairs had evolved into something else. Sometimes he brought coffee from the hotel. Sometimes he simply sat quietly while Clara worked, reading a week-old newspaper or carving small figures from wood scraps. His presence had become as natural as breathing, as unremarked upon as the ticking of Dolores's mantel clock. "That man's courting you," Dolores announced one afternoon after Luke had spent an hour watching Clara fit a wedding dress on the banker's daughter. Clara's hand stilled. "He's doing no such thing. We're friends." "Friends." Dolores tested the word like suspicious milk. "That why he looks at you like you hung the moon?" "He doesn't, and that's why you get all flustered when he walks in." "I don't get flustered." But Clara felt heat rising in her cheeks, betraying her words. "Child, I may be old, but I ain't blind. That man's been patient as Job, but even Job had limits." That evening, as Clara closed the shop, she found herself thinking about Dolores's words. Was Luke courting her? The thought seemed impossible. Men like Luke, steady, respected, belonging, didn't court women like her. Women who'd failed at marriage, who towered over others, who carried their past like a stone in their pocket. She was so lost in thought that she almost missed the envelope tucked under the door. Her name was written across it in careful script. Inside, a brief note. "There's a mare at Thompson's livery that needs looking at. Good bloodlines but scared of her own shadow. Owner wants to sell cheap. Thought you might be interested. L." Clara read it twice, puzzled. She knew nothing about horses beyond which end bit and which end kicked. Why would Luke think? Then she remembered their conversation months ago, about breaking horses and patient hands, about trust earned slowly, about looking at things differently. She found Luke at the livery as the sun set, standing beside a stall where a bay mare paced nervously. The horse was beautiful despite her agitation, fine-boned, with intelligent eyes that showed too much white. "Why did you want me to see her?" Luke leaned against the stall door, his voice soft to avoid spooking the mare further. "Man who owned her before. Wasn't kind. She's strong, good lines, but she flinches when anyone moves too quick. Thompson's ready to sell her for meat price." Clara watched the mare pace, seeing herself in the nervous movements, the ready-to-bolt tension. "I don't know anything about horses." "Don't need to. Just need to know about second chances." She turned to look at him, finding his eyes already on her, not on the horse, on her. "Are we still talking about the mare?" "Maybe, maybe not." He straightened, moving slowly to open the stall door. "Come here. Let her smell you." Clara approached carefully, following Luke's murmured instructions. The mare shied initially, but something Clara's stillness, perhaps, or the quiet way she held herself made the horse pause. They stood there, woman and mare, taking each other's measure. "She's like you," Luke said quietly. "Too tall for most folks' comfort. Been handled rough, but look at her lines. Clara, look at the strength there." The mare stretched her neck forward, nostrils flaring as she investigated Clara's outstretched hand. When Clara didn't move, didn't grab, the horse stepped closer. "I can't afford a horse." "Didn't ask you to buy her, asked you to look at her, to see what I see." "And what do you see?" Luke moved to stand beside her, his presence solid and warm in the cooling evening. "Something worth patience, worth the time it takes to earn trust, worth looking at different." Clara's throat tightened. They weren't talking about the horse anymore, if they ever had been. "Luke," "I know what people say," he continued, voice steady. "About you, about me spending time at the shop. Let them talk. They don't know about the shirts you mend before they tear. About the way you make Dolores laugh. About how you never complain even when your hands hurt from working late. How do you know my hands hurt? Because I pay attention. He turned to face her fully. Been paying attention for 3 months now. Maybe longer. The mare, forgotten, lipped at Clara's sleeve. The touch grounded her, kept her from floating away on the tide of Luke's words. I was married before, she said, in Philadelphia. He wasn't cruel, exactly, just disappointed. I wasn't the wife he expected, too tall, too plain, too much myself. When he asked me to leave, he made it sound like a kindness. Luke's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. I'm not good at being what people expect. Clara continued, I don't shrink myself well. I tried, but you're not meant to shrink. Luke's voice carried certainty like a loaded wagon. You're meant to stand tall and mend things and make beautiful dresses and maybe, if I'm lucky, let a broken-down cowboy spend his afternoons watching you work. Clara laughed, surprising herself. You're not broken down. No, then why do I keep tearing my clothes? Because you're too proud to admit you just want to visit. Maybe. He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his weathered face. Or maybe I just like watching you make things whole again. They stood there in the gathering dusk, the mare calm between them now, and Clara felt something shift. Not a grand revelation, but a quiet understanding. Luke wasn't offering to save her, she'd saved herself. He wasn't trying to change her or shrink her or make her fit some ideal. He was simply offering to stand beside her, to look at her like she belonged exactly as she was. The mare, Clara said finally. What's her name? Doesn't have one yet. Thompson just calls her the difficult one. Clara stroked the horse's neck, feeling the tremor of fear ease under her touch. Grace, she decided. Her name is Grace. Grace, Luke repeated. I'll tell Thompson. Keep her off the meat wagon. I still can't afford. I'll buy her. You can visit. Help her remember that hands can be kind. When you're ready, maybe you'll ride her. I don't know how to ride. I'll teach you. The offer hung between them, meaning more than horses, more than lessons. Clara met his eyes in the dim light. Just riding lessons. Whatever you want. Clara, whatever you're ready for. I'm a patient man. She believed him. Luke Carver had been patient for months, creating reasons to see her, standing up for her, looking at her like she was exactly enough. He'd brought her to see a scared mare not to manipulate her emotions, but to show her a mirror and to let her see how he saw them both. Sunday, she said, the church social. I'll go with you. His smile was worth all the whispers that would follow. I'll pick you up at the shop. As they left the livery, Clara glanced back at Grace, the difficult one, the too tall one, the one who'd learned to fear but might learn to trust again. She understood why Luke had brought her here, understood what he was really saying with his patience and his torn shirts and his quiet presence. He was saying, I see you, I'll wait, you're worth the time. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Clara May Elliston believed that might be true. The rain came suddenly that Thursday evening, transforming Cedar Falls' dusty streets into rivers of mud. Clara had stayed late at the shop, finishing Mrs. Morrison's morning dress, black bombazine with jet buttons that caught the lamplight like dark stars. She'd lost track of time, as often happened when her hands found their rhythm, and now faced the prospect of walking home through the deluge. She stood at the shop's front door, watching the rain slant sideways under the force of prairie wind. Her shawl would be soaked through in seconds, her boots ruined. But there was nothing for it. Planning to swim home, Clara spun around to find Luke in the doorway between the shop and the back room, water dripping from his hat brim. He must have come in through the rear entrance. How long have you been here? Hour or so. Saw your light on. Figured you'd need an escort. He held up an oilcloth coat. Brought this from the ranch. Might be a bit short on you, but it'll keep the worst off. Clara took the coat, noting how he'd said escort instead of rescue. Such a small thing. But Luke had a gift for small things that mattered. "You can't walk me home in this. You'll catch your death." Who said anything about walking? He gestured toward the back door. "Brought the wagon. Even managed to rig up a cover. Nothing fancy, but it'll keep us mostly dry." Us. The word settled in Clara's chest like a warm stone. She pulled on the coat. It was indeed short, ending at her knees rather than her ankles. But the gesture of it, the forethought, made her eyes sting. They dashed to the wagon. Luke's hand steady on her elbow as they navigated the slick boards of the sidewalk. The wagon bed did have a cover canvas stretched over wooden hoops, like a miniature Conestoga. Inside, he'd laid out wool blankets and even placed a lantern in a secure holder. "You did all this." Clara had to raise her voice over the rain drumming on canvas. "Storm's been building all day. Figured you'd work late." He clicked to the horses, guiding them carefully through the muddy streets. "Besides, gave me an excuse to check on you." "You don't need excuses anymore." The words slipped out before Clara could catch them. Even in the dim lantern light, she saw Luke's hands tighten on the reins. "No," he agreed quietly. "I don't." They rode in comfortable silence, the storm creating a strange intimacy as if the rest of the world had been washed away, leaving only this small, dry space they shared. Clara found herself studying Luke's profile, the way concentration drew his brows together, how his hands moved with unconscious skill to guide the horses through the treacherous streets. "Tell me about your ranch," she said impulsively. Luke glanced at her, surprised. "Not much to tell. 160 acres up near Sage Creek. Run about 50 head of cattle, a handful of horses. Nothing grand. But it's yours." "It is that." Pride colored his voice, quiet but unmistakable. "Worked other men's land for 10 years to save up for it. Every fence post, every well dug did it myself." "That must have been lonely work." "Sometimes." He navigated around a particularly deep puddle. "Had a wife for a while. Margaret, good woman, but she wanted things I couldn't give her. Parties and society. Trips to Denver. She said I loved the land more than her." "Did you?" Luke considered this. Loved them different, but when she made me choose, the land was the only one not asking me to be someone else. Clara understood that bone deep. My husband, ex-husband, wanted me to be smaller. Not just in height, but in everything, opinions, dreams, the space I took up in the world. I tried. For 3 years I tried. But shrinking yourself is like holding your breath. Eventually, you have to inhale or die. So you inhaled. And he asked me to leave. The old hurt had lost its sharp edges, worn smooth by distance and new perspectives. Said he was doing me a kindness, letting me go find someone who could love me as I was, as if being myself was a flaw to be tolerated rather than just being. Luke turned the wagon onto the narrower road leading to his ranch, and Clara realized with a start that they weren't heading to the shop's back room. "Luke, storm's getting worse. My place is closer, and the road back to town will be impassable soon. I've got a good stove, dry clothes that might come close to fitting, and I make decent coffee." He paused. "But if you're uncomfortable, I'll turn around right now. Your reputation." "My reputation was ruined the minute I stepped off the stage, alone and too tall for propriety." Clara surprised herself with a laugh. "I'm tired of living for other people's opinions." The ranch materialized through the rain like something from a dream, low buildings huddled against the storm, windows glowing with warm light. Luke pulled the wagon directly into the barn, and Clara caught glimpses of his world-neat stalls, well-maintained tack, the sweet smell of hay and horses. Grace nickered from her stall, and Clara felt an unexpected surge of pleasure at the familiar sound. She'd been visiting the mare regularly, building trust handful by handful, and the horse had begun to look for her arrival. "She knows your step already," Luke observed. helping Clara down from the wagon. His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary, and Clara felt heat that had nothing to do with the oilcloth coat. They ran through the rain to the house, laughing like children as they splashed through puddles. The front door opened into a world that was purely Luke sparse but clean. Everything in its place and every item with a purpose. A stone fireplace dominated one wall. Bookshelves flanked the windows, and a kitchen area occupied one corner. "It's perfect," Clara said, and meant it. Luke looked pleased, but tried to hide it by busying himself with the stove. "There's clothes in the trunk by the bed, some of Margaret's things she didn't take. You're taller, but they should work better than staying in wet things." Clara found the trunk, lifting out a simple blue calico dress. It would be short, but it was clean and dry. She changed behind a screen, hanging her wet things carefully, trying not to think too hard about the intimacy of being in Luke's home, wearing clothes that had belonged to another woman who'd shared his life. When she emerged, Luke had coffee brewing and was slicing bread with focused concentration. He'd changed too, into dry work clothes that made him look younger, less formal. "Hungry, it's not much, but—" "It's perfect," Clara said again, settling into a chair by the fire. All of it. They ate in companionable silence, the storm creating a wall of sound around them. Clara found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in months, maybe years. There was no performance here, no need to be smaller or different or anything but herself. "I should tell you something," Luke said suddenly, setting down his coffee cup, "about why I asked you to come see Grace, why I keep—" He gestured vaguely, encompassing the torn clothes, the patient visits, all of it. Clara waited, watching emotions play across his face like cloud shadows on prairie grass. "My mother was like you. Not in height, she was a tiny thing, but in spirit, too much herself for my father's comfort. He wasn't cruel, just constant, always pushing her to be quieter, smaller, less. She faded a little more each year, like a photograph left in sunlight." His voice had gone rough. Clara reached across the small table, covering his hand with hers. "When she died, I was 16. Last thing she said to me was, 'Don't let anyone make you less than you are.' I've tried to live by that. And when I saw you that first night at Holbrook's, tall and proud even when exhausted, refusing to apologize for existing, I thought—" "What?" "I thought, there's someone who won't fade." He turned his hand palm up, interlacing their fingers. "I know I'm not much for words. Clara, no, I'm just a rancher with rough hands and a small spread. But I also know how to see value where others don't. And I see you." Clara's throat felt tight. "Luke, not asking for anything you're not ready to give. Just want you to know where I stand. Been standing here a while now, and I'm not planning on moving." The storm chose that moment to intensify, thunder rolling across the prairie like God's own percussion. Clara squeezed Luke's hand, then stood, moving to the window to watch the rain sheet down. "It's beautiful," she said, "violent and wild and beautiful." Luke joined her, standing close enough that she could feel his warmth. "Some folks would call it too much, too loud, too fierce. Some folks are fools." He laughed, soft and surprised. "That they are." They stood together watching the storm remake the world, and Clara felt something settle deep in her bones. Not love. Not yet that would come. But the possibility of it. The promise that here was someone who wouldn't ask her to be less, who saw her height and her strength and her too-muchness as things to be celebrated rather than endured. "The rain won't let up tonight," Luke said eventually. "You should stay. Take the bed. I'll take the floor by the fire." "Luke, no arguments. Your reputation might be your own business, but your safety's mine, at least for tonight." Clara turned to face him, marveling at this man who created tears in his clothes so she could mend them, who bought a scared horse so she could learn to trust, who built a canvas cover for his wagon because he knew she'd work late on a stormy night. "Thank you," she said simply, For all of it. He touched her face. Just the lightest brush of fingers against her cheek. Get some rest. Clara may. Storm will blow itself out by morning. But as Clara settled into the bed that smelled of cedar and soap, listening to the rain and the steady sound of Luke tending the fire, she thought the real storm might just be beginning. The kind that remade landscapes and washed away old boundaries. The kind that left the world green and new in its wake. And for the first time in her life, Clara May Elliston wasn't afraid of the weather. Sunday morning arrived clear and bright, the storm having washed the world clean. Clara stood at the shop's back room mirror, adjusting the collar of her best dress, a deep green wool she'd altered to fit properly, adding small touches of lace at the cuffs and throat. She'd never been one for vanity, but today felt different. Today, she would walk into church on Luke Carver's arm, and the whole town would see. "Stop fussing," Dolores called from the shop front. "You look fine." "I'm not fussing." But Clara's hands betrayed her, smoothing imaginary wrinkles from her skirt. "Course not. That's why you've redone your hair 3 times. Before Clara could respond, the shop bell chimed. Luke stood in the doorway, dressed in his Sunday best, a black coat over clean white shirt, string tie knotted precisely. He'd shaved close, and his hair was still damp from washing. When he saw Clara, something shifted in his expression, a softening that made her breath catch. "Miss Elliston." He touched his hat brim, formal as any gentleman caller. "Mr. Carver." She matched his tone, but couldn't help the smile tugging at her lips. "You two going to stand there gawking or actually make it to church?" Dolores's voice held barely suppressed amusement. "Go on, give the gossip something worth talking about." Luke offered his arm, and Clara took it, marveling at how natural the gesture felt. They walked down Main Street like that, her hand tucked in the crook of his elbow, matching their strides without thought. Curtains twitched as they passed. A few early churchgoers stopped mid-conversation to stare. Clara kept her chin high, drawing strength from Luke's steady presence. "Nervous?" he asked quietly. "Terrified," she admitted, but not backing down. "Good. Backing down's not your style." The church sat at the town's eastern edge, white clapboard gleaming in morning sun. Families gathered on its steps, children darting between their parents' legs while women compared hat trimmings and men discussed cattle prices. As Luke and Clara approached, a hush fell over the crowd like a blanket. Mrs. Weatherby stood near the door, her face cycling through expressions like a magic lantern show: shock, disapproval, and something that might have been curiosity. "Luke," she managed, "and Miss Elliston." "Morning. Prudence." Luke's voice carried pleasant neutrality. "Fine day for worship." "Indeed." Mrs. Weatherby's gaze traveled up Clara's height, lingering on where her hand rested on Luke's arm. "I wasn't aware you were a church-going woman. Miss Elliston." "Every soul needs grace, Mrs. Weatherby," Clara replied evenly. "Some of us just have to travel farther to find it." Before the older woman could respond, Luke guided Clara through the doors and into the sanctuary. The interior was simple wooden pews worn smooth by years of faithful sitting, clear glass windows letting in streams of light, a modest pulpit where Reverend Mills already stood reviewing his notes. Luke led her to a pew midway down the aisle, not the back rows where strangers sat, nor the front where established families held court, but the middle ground visible but not ostentatious. As they settled, Clara noticed the ripple of whispers spreading through the congregation like rings on water. "Let them talk," Luke murmured, his hand briefly covering hers on the pew between them. "They'll tire of it soon enough." But Clara found, to her surprise, that the whispers didn't wound as they once might have. Sitting here with Luke, in this simple church filled with imperfect people seeking grace, she felt a strange peace. She'd spent so long trying to make herself fit into spaces too small for her. This was different. Luke wasn't trying to squeeze her in. He was making space, calmly and deliberately, for exactly who she was. The service began with hymns, voices rising in imperfect harmony. Luke's baritone rumbled beside her, slightly off-key but sincere. Clara joined in, her alto threading through the melody, and for a moment felt part of something larger than herself. Reverend Mills preached on the Good Samaritan, his voice rising and falling with practiced cadence. "Who is our neighbor?" he asked, spectacles catching the light. "Not just those who look like us, think like us, fit our narrow definitions of propriety. Christ calls us to see with his eyes, to extend grace as it was extended to us freely, without condition." Clara felt Luke shift beside her, the smallest movement of satisfaction. She wondered if he'd known today's sermon topic, if he'd chosen this particular Sunday deliberately. It wouldn't surprise her Luke had a way of arranging things without seeming to arrange them. After the service, the congregation spilled onto the lawn where tables groaned under the weight of covered dishes, the church social, that peculiarly American mixing of faith and food, gossip and grace. Clara had brought an apple pie, made in Dolores's kitchen with fruit bought from Thompson's store. Nothing fancy, but honest work honestly done. "Clara May!" Young Mary from the inn rushed over, eyes bright with excitement. "Is it true you're teaching the mare to eat from your hand? Jimmy Parker says he saw you at the livery," talking to her like she was people. "Horses understand more than we credit them for," Clara said, charmed by the girl's enthusiasm. "Sometimes they just need someone to listen." Mary nodded solemnly, as if Clara had shared great wisdom. "Could you teach me, if it's not too much trouble? And if Mr. Carver doesn't mind?" "I don't mind at all," Luke said, appearing with 2 cups of cider. "In fact, Grace could use more friends, gentle ones." And just like that, the ice began to crack. Mary's acceptance seemed to give others permission. Mrs. Thompson approached to ask about letting out her daughter's wedding dress. Young Tom Morrison wanted to know if it was true Clara had lived in Philadelphia, and what were the buildings like. Even some of the men, drawn by Luke's presence, made gruff attempts at conversation. Not everyone thawed. Mrs. Weatherby maintained her disapproving distance, and several other matrons followed her lead. But Clara found she minded less than expected. She had work she loved, a friend in Dolores, and Luke, whatever Luke was becoming to her. The rest would come, or it wouldn't. As afternoon wore on, Luke touched her elbow. "Walk with me." They strolled toward the creek that bordered church property, leaving the social's chatter behind. The water ran clear and quick, swollen with storm runoff. Luke picked up a flat stone, sent it skipping across the surface 3 hops before it sank. "I never learned that," Clara admitted. "My mother said it wasn't ladylike." Luke selected another stone, pressed it into her palm. "Good thing you're not trying to be a lady, then. You're trying to be Clara." He positioned himself behind her, guiding her arm through the motion. Clara was acutely aware of his proximity, the warmth of him, the way his breath stirred the hair at her temple. The stone flew, skipped twice, and disappeared. Not bad for a first try. His voice was low, intimate. "Most things worth doing take practice." "Like trust. Like trust." He stepped back, giving her space but staying close. "Clara, I need to tell you something." Her heart stuttered. "What?" "I've been writing to a judge in Cheyenne, friend of mine from the Army days, about your situation." Clara stiffened. "My situation?" "Your marriage, the divorce." Luke's eyes were steady on hers. "Way you described it sounded like abandonment. In Wyoming territory. That's grounds for a legal dissolution. Clean break, official papers. No more looking over your shoulder." I don't understand. Why would you?" "Because you deserve to be free. All the way free. Not just in practice, but in law." He touched her face gently. "Because maybe, when you're ready, you might want to marry again. And when that day comes, I want there to be no shadows, no questions, just choice." Clara's eyes burned with sudden tears. "Luke Carver, are you proposing—" "No." His thumb brushed her cheekbone. "I'm clearing the path. When I propose, if I propose, I want it to be because you want it, not because you need it. There's a difference." She turned her face into his palm, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of it. This man who spoke little but acted constantly, who understood the difference between rescue and respect, who made space for her in the world without trying to define her place in it. "The judge," she managed. "What did he say?" "That with proper documentation and testimony, it's a straightforward matter. Few months at most." Luke's hand dropped, but he caught hers, holding it carefully. "Only if you want to pursue it. Your choice, Clara. Always your choice." Standing there by the creek, with church bells silent and the social continuing without them, Clara felt something fundamental shift, not falling in love that had been happening for months. Slow and steady as spring growth, but the recognition of it, the acceptance that this man had somehow become necessary to her happiness. "Yes," she said simply, "I want to be free." Luke's smile transformed his face. "Then we'll make it happen." They walked back to the social hand in hand, no longer caring who saw or what they whispered. Let the town talk. Clara had found something worth more than their approval, a partner who saw her height as strength, her past as prologue, her too-muchness as exactly enough. "Next Sunday," Luke said as they rejoined the crowd, "would you come to dinner at the ranch proper like, with Dolores as chaperone if that makes you comfortable? I want to show you something." "What?" "The house, where I might build an addition. A sewing room, maybe, with big windows facing east. Good light for detailed work." He was trying to sound casual and failing utterly. "Just thoughts, plans, nothing urgent." Clara squeezed his hand, understanding flooding through her. He was showing her a future, offering it up like one of his carefully selected stones, smooth and perfect for skipping across whatever waters lay ahead. "I'd like that," she said. "The dinner, the tour, all of it. And if Mrs. Weatherby happened to overhear, if the gossips had new fuel for their fires, what did it matter? Clara May Elliston had spent too long making herself small for other people's comfort. It was time, past time, to take up all the space she needed. The stage from Denver arrived on Tuesday afternoon, churning up dust and bringing with it the one person Clara had hoped never to see again. She was working at the shop window, taking advantage of the good light to embroider delicate roses on a christening gown, when movement outside caught her eye. A man descended from the coach, tall, well-dressed, carrying himself with the particular arrogance of those who mistake privilege for character. Thomas Renshaw. Clara's needle slipped, pricking her finger. A drop of blood welled up, threatening to stain the white fabric. She pressed her thumb to the wound, heart racing as she watched her former fiancé survey Cedar Falls with obvious disdain. "You've gone pale as fresh linen," Dolores observed from behind the counter. "What's wrong?" "Nothing." But Clara's voice came out thin, unconvincing. I'll be right back." She retreated to the back room, hands shaking as she pressed them against her skirts. Thomas here. Thomas, who had courted her for 2 years in Philadelphia, who had promised marriage and respectability, who had broken their engagement the week before the wedding because she'd spoken too boldly at his father's dinner party. "You're too much," he'd said, not meeting her eyes. "Too tall, too opinionated, too visible. My family has certain expectations." She'd left Philadelphia the next month, unable to bear the whispers, the pitying looks, the sense of failure that clung to her like smoke. And now he was here. Clara Dolores appeared in the doorway, concern creasing her face. "Child, you look like you've seen a ghost." "Something like that." Clara forced herself to breathe slowly. "Someone I used to know? From before." Understanding dawned in the older woman's eyes. "The one who—" "Yes?" Dolores's expression hardened. Well, he can't hurt you here. You've got friends now. Protection. But Clara knew better. Men like Thomas didn't need to hurt with fists. They had other weapons, words. Influence. The ability to make themselves believed over any woman, especially one already marked as different. She was right to worry. Within an hour, Thomas had taken a room at the inn and begun making inquiries. By evening, when Luke came by the shop as usual, his face was grim. "There's a man in town asking questions about you," he said without preamble. "Well-dressed fellow from back east. Says he's here on business for the railroad." Clara's laugh was bitter. "The railroad doesn't run within 50 miles of Cedar Falls." "That's what I thought." Luke studied her face, reading the tension there. "You know him." It wasn't a question. Clara set down her sewing, knowing she owed Luke truth, hating that Thomas could still make her feel small, even from a distance. "His name is Thomas Renshaw. We were engaged, back in Philadelphia. He ended it because I wasn't suitable for his family's standing." Luke's jaw tightened. "And now he's here." "Land office business, probably. His father owns half of Pennsylvania, and they're always looking to own more." Clara tried to sound dismissive, but Luke knew her too well now. "That's not what's worrying you." She met his eyes, seeing the steady concern there. "Thomas doesn't like losing control. When I left Philadelphia without his permission." "Without his permission?" Luke's voice had gone dangerously quiet. "He seemed to think breaking our engagement meant he still had some say in my life. Where I went, who I spoke to." Clara's hands clenched in her lap. "I disagreed, strongly, in front of several of his business associates." Despite everything, Luke's mouth twitched. "I'll bet you did. It's not funny. Luke, men like Thomas, they don't forget embarrassment. They collect on it with interest." Luke moved closer, not touching but present, solid as a fence post. "He won't hurt you, not while I'm here." But Thomas was too clever for direct confrontation. He began with whispers, strategic conversations at the saloon and the general store. By Thursday, Clara could feel the shift in town sentiment like a change in weather. Customers who'd warmed to her grew cool again. Orders were canceled with vague excuses. Even Mary from the inn seemed nervous when Clara smiled at her. "He's poisoning the well," Dolores said flatly after the third customer in a day had remembered urgent business elsewhere. "Drip by drip, word by word." Clara bent over her sewing, trying to ignore the sick feeling in her stomach. "What's he saying?" "That you're a woman of questionable morals who pursued him relentlessly in Philadelphia. That he was forced to break the engagement when he discovered your unsuitable background. That you followed him here, hoping to trap him into marriage." The unfairness of it burned like acid. Clara had built something here work. Friendship. The possibility of love, and Thomas was destroying it with the casual cruelty of a child pulling wings off flies. That evening, she was closing the shop when Thomas finally appeared. He filled the doorway, still handsome in that polished way that had once dazzled her, before she'd learned that shine could hide rot. "Clara," he said her name like he owned it. "You're looking, well." "Mr. Renshaw," she kept her voice level, hands steady. "The shop is closed." "I'm not here as a customer." He stepped inside without invitation, eyes roaming the space with proprietary interest. "This is what you've reduced yourself to, mending clothes in a frontier town. Honest work for honest pay, something you wouldn't understand." His face darkened. "Still that sharp tongue? I'd hoped time might have taught you restraint." "Time taught me many things. Restraint wasn't among them." Thomas moved closer, and Clara fought the urge to retreat. She'd learned that showing fear only encouraged him. "You embarrassed me," he said softly. "In front of men whose opinions matter. Did you think I'd forget? I thought you'd move on, find another woman to diminish. But none quite like you." His eyes traveled up her height with familiar disdain. "So impossible to overlook. so determined to be seen. "What do you want?" "Thomas." "Initially, just passing through. But imagine my surprise finding you here, playing house with that cowboy, setting yourself up as respectable." He smiled, cold as winter moon. "We both know better, don't we? Get out! Or what you'll have your rough friend threaten me." Thomas straightened his cuffs, a gesture she remembered with sickening clarity. "I think not. See, I've been appointed territorial land assessor. Amazing how much authority that carries. Checking deeds, investigating claims, ensuring all businesses are properly documented." The threat hung between them like a blade. Clara thought of Dolores, whose shop papers might not withstand scrutiny. Of Luke, whose ranch boundaries were marked more by handshakes than legal documents. Of all the ways a man with power and spite could hurt those she'd come to love. "Leave them out of this," she said quietly. "Whatever satisfaction you need, take it from me." "Oh, I intend to." Thomas moved to the door, pausing for a parting shot. "You should have stayed in Philadelphia. Clara should have apologized, made amends. Now you'll learn what happens when you forget your place." The door closed behind him with a gentle click that sounded like a trap springing shut. Clara sank into a chair, mind racing. She needed to warn Luke, needed to protect Dolores, needed... "You all right in there?" Luke's voice from the back entrance nearly made her sob with relief. He must have seen Thomas leave, must have been waiting. She was in his arms before conscious thought, pressing her face against his chest, breathing in leather and sage and safety. "Hey now." His arms came around her, solid and sure. "What did he say?" Clara pulled back enough to look at him. "He's going to hurt you, all of you, because of me." "Let him try. You don't understand. Men like Thomas, they don't fight fair. They use law and influence and—" "Clara." Luke's hands framed her face, thumbs gentle on her cheekbones. "Look at me." She did, finding steel in those pale blue eyes. "I've faced down claim jumpers and cattle thieves and storms that could strip paint off a barn. You think one soft city man with a fancy title scares me?" "He should. He has the power to—" "He has nothing. Power comes from community, from respect earned over time. He's been here 3 days. I've been here 15 years. Dolores longer than that. You think folks will take his word over ours?" Clara wanted to believe him, but she'd seen how quickly whispers could turn a town. Some already have. Then they weren't worth having. Luke pulled her close again. "We'll face this together. That's what partners do." Partners. The word settled into her chest, warm and solid. She thought of all the ways Luke had partnered her, already creating work for her dignity, standing beside her at church, planning rooms in a house not yet built. "He won't stop," she warned. "Not until he feels he's won. Then we'll make sure he doesn't win." Luke's voice rumbled through his chest. "Starting with those divorce papers. Judge Morrison wrote back yesterday he can expedite things, given the circumstances, make you legally free within the month." Free. The word had taken on new meaning since coming to Cedar Falls. Not just free from Thomas or her failed marriage, but free to choose, to build, to love without looking backward. "And if he makes trouble before then—" Luke pulled back, a smile playing at his lips that was decidedly ungentle. "Then he'll learn that frontier justice moves a mite faster than city law, and that cowboys protect what's theirs." "I'm not yours," Clara said automatically, but without heat. "No," Luke agreed. "But you're choosing to stand with me. That makes you under my protection, whether you like it or not." And standing there in the lamplit shop, held by a man who saw her strength as something to protect rather than diminish, Clara realized she did like it. Not because she needed protecting, but because Luke offered it as partnership, not possession, as something freely given and freely received. Thomas could whisper all he wanted, but Clara had learned the difference between words and truth, between appearance and substance. and she'd choose Luke's quiet certainty over Thomas's polished lies every time. "Tomorrow," she said, pulling away reluctantly. "We should talk to Dolores. Make sure her papers are in order." "Already done. Spoke to Judge Morrison this afternoon. Everything's legal and proper." Luke touched her cheek, gentle as breathing. "Told you, Clara. Partners." As they closed the shop together, Clara thought about the battles coming, the way Thomas would try to tear down everything she'd built. But she also thought about community and choice, about partners who planned ahead and friends who stood firm. Thomas might have the law on his side, but Clara had something better, people who looked at her and saw not too much, but exactly enough. And that, she was beginning to understand, was its own kind of power. Clara knew something was wrong the moment she turned onto 2nd Street. The shop door hung askew on its hinges, morning light streaming through at the wrong angle. Her steps quickened, then broke into a run as she saw the scattered fabric on the doorstep, silk and calico ground into the dust by careless boots. Inside was worse. Bolts of cloth had been pulled from shelves and slashed. The cutting table lay overturned, Dolores's careful patterns torn and scattered like snow. And there, crumpled near the back room, was Dolores herself. "No, no, no!" Clara dropped to her knees, hands gentle as she cradled the older woman's head. Blood matted the gray hair, and one eye was already swelling shut. Dolores's good eye fluttered open. "Clara, child, you shouldn't. The men might still—" "Hush. Save your strength." Clara's hands shook as she checked for serious injury. The blood seemed to come from a cut on the scalp, messy but not deep. Who did this? 2 men. Came just after dawn. Dolores winced as Clara helped her sit up. "Said they were checking business licenses on Mr. Renshaw's orders. When I went to get the papers, they attacked you." Cold fury settled in Clara's chest like iron. "Did you recognize them?" "That Briggs fellow who hangs around the saloon, and another stranger, had city clothes but mean eyes." Dolores gripped Clara's arm with surprising strength. "They said this was a warning, said worse would come if you didn't leave town." Clara helped Dolores to a chair, then wetted a cloth to clean the wound. Her mind raced even as her hands stayed steady. Thomas had escalated from whispers to violence, hidden behind the thinnest veneer of authority, and Dolores had paid the price. "We need to get you to Doc Morrison." "I'm fine. Just knocked me around some." But Dolores swayed even sitting. "You're not fine, and we're going." Clara supported the older woman, fury giving her strength. "Can you walk?" They made it 3 steps before the door flew open. Luke filled the entrance, taking in the destruction with one sweeping glance before his eyes found Clara. "Thompson saw men leaving. I came fast as—" He broke off, seeing Dolores's battered face. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. "Who?" "Briggs," Dolores managed. "And another city man." Luke's expression went still in a way that raised the hair on Clara's neck. She'd seen him gentle with horses, patient with her fears, kind to children. This was something else, the face of a man who'd survived frontier winters and range wars. "Get her to Doc Morrison," he said quietly. "Then stay there." "Luke." "Stay there, Clara." He touched her face, the gesture at odds with the ice in his eyes. "Please." He was gone before she could argue, spurs ringing against the boardwalk like war drums. Clara wanted to follow, to demand he not do something reckless, but Dolores needed help. The shop could wait. Justice could wait. Everything could wait except getting her friend to safety. Doc Morrison's house sat behind the barber shop, marked by a shingle that swayed in the morning breeze. The doctor himself answered Clara's frantic knocking, taking in the situation with practiced calm. "Bring her in. Sarah, clear the examination table." The next hour blurred together Doc cleaning wounds, checking for broken bones. Sarah Morrison providing steady comfort while Clara paced. Through it all, her mind kept circling back to Luke's face, to the promise of violence barely leashed. "She'll be fine," Doc Morrison finally announced. "Bruised and shaken, but nothing broken. Head wounds always look worse than they are." "Can move her to my place," Sarah offered. "She shouldn't be alone." "I'll stay with her," Clara said. "It's my fault she was hurt." "Horse feathers." Dolores's voice was weak but firm. "Only fault belongs to the cowards who jump old women." Before Clara could argue, commotion erupted outside. Shouts, running feet, the kind of excitement that meant either fire or fight. Doc Morrison went to the window, eyebrows climbing. "Well, looks like someone delivered Briggs to the sheriff," rather forcefully. Clara pushed past him to see, in the street, Briggs sat in the dust, nose streaming blood, one arm cradled against his chest. Sheriff Coleman stood over him, looking none too pleased about being roused this early. And there, leaning against a post with deceptive casualness, was Luke. His knuckles were split, his shirt was torn, but he stood easy, relaxed, like a man who'd finished a satisfying chore. "He attacked Mrs. Abernathy," Luke was saying, voice carrying clear. "Him and another fellow. Destroyed property, assaulted an elderly woman. I made a citizen's arrest." "Looks like you made a bit more than that," the sheriff observed dryly. He resisted. Luke's tone suggested butter wouldn't melt in his mouth. Vigorously. Clara found herself moving without thought, pushing through the gathering crowd. Luke saw her coming, and something in his expression softened, though his stance remained wary. "I told you to stay." "Since when have I ever done what I'm told?" She stopped just out of reach, aware of the watching eyes. "Your knuckles need tending." "They're fine." "They're not, and you know it." She looked at Sheriff Coleman. "Are you arresting him?" "Which him?" The sheriff looked tired. "Briggs here is definitely spending time in my jail. As for Luke, well, citizens' arrests can get messy. No law against defending our community." "He's lying," Briggs spat blood, glaring through rapidly swelling eyes. "Renshaw said—" "Said what?" The sheriff's voice sharpened. "That you should bust up the dress shop, attack old ladies." Briggs clamped his mouth shut, late wisdom finally arriving. But the damage was done. The crowd murmured, pieces falling into place. Thomas Renshaw, the stranger who'd been spreading poison, violence against one of their own. The mathematics of frontier justice were simple and unforgiving. "Take him in," Coleman said to his deputy. "We'll have words with Mr. Renshaw next." As Briggs was hauled away, the crowd began to disperse. Some nodded to Luke, approval clear. Others glanced at Clara with something new in their faces, not suspicion now, but solidarity. She was one of theirs, and someone had hurt her friend. That mattered more than old gossip. "Come on," Clara said to Luke. "Let me look at those hands." He followed her back to Doc Morrison's, docile now that the immediate threat had passed. Sarah took over with Dolores, leaving Clara to tend Luke in the kitchen. She worked in silence, cleaning split knuckles, checking for broken bones. The damage was superficial. Whoever had taught Luke to fight had taught him well. "You could have been killed," she said finally. "Doubt it. Briggs is mean but soft. The other one ran like a rabbit when I found them." "That's not the point." Clara secured the last bandage with perhaps more force than necessary. "You can't just—" "Can't what?" Luke caught her hands, stilling their nervous movement. "Can't protect what matters to me. Can't stand by while cowards hurt innocent people. Can't risk yourself for my battles." "Your battles?" Luke's laugh was short, harsh. "Clara, when are you going to understand your battles became mine the night I paid for your room? Maybe before that. Maybe the moment you walked into Holbrook's. Too tall and too proud and too damn magnificent to let them break you." The words stole her breath. Luke, who spoke so carefully, who measured out sentences like expensive whiskey, was looking at her with naked emotion. "I'm not worth—" "Don't!" His grip tightened. "Don't you dare tell me what you're worth. I know what I see. A woman who works hard, who makes beautiful things, who's teaching a scared mare to trust again. A woman who stands tall even when the world wants her to shrink. You think I'd let Thomas Renshaw or anyone else take that away?" Clara's eyes burned. "He won't stop. This will only make him worse." "Let him come." Luke's smile held edges. "He wants to play frontier games. He'll learn frontier rules. And the first rule is simple. We protect our own." A knock interrupted whatever Clara might have said. Sheriff Coleman entered, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable. "Miss Elliston, Luke, thought you should know I went to question Renshaw, but he's gone. Lit out on the morning stage. According to Holbrook, left this." He handed Clara an envelope, her name written across it in Thomas's precise script. Inside, a single sheet. "This isn't over. No backward town or rough cowboy changes what you are, a woman who forgot her place. I'll be back with proper authority. Enjoy your little victory. It won't last. T.E.R." Clara read it twice, then handed it to Luke. He scanned it, face expressionless. "He's running," the sheriff said. "Briggs gave him up quick enough once he realized Renshaw had abandoned him. Assault charges don't look good for a territorial assessor. My guess is he's heading back east to lick his wounds. Or to gather more power." Clara said quietly. "He meant what he wrote. He'll be back." "Maybe." Coleman settled his hat. "But that's tomorrow's problem. Today, you've got a shop to put back together and a town that's remembered why we don't take kindly to outsiders causing trouble." After he left, Clara and Luke sat in Sarah Morrison's sunny kitchen, hands linked across the table, through the window. Clara could see townspeople heading toward the dress shop, carrying brooms and hammers. Mary from the inn directed traffic while Mrs. Henderson, who'd snubbed Clara just days ago, organized the salvageable fabric. "They're helping," Clara said, wonder coloring her voice. "Course they are. You're one of ours now. Have been for a while, even if some were slow to see it." Luke squeezed her hand. "Thomas made a mistake, thinking fear would drive you out. All he did was show folks what they were risking by listening to his poison." Clara thought about community, about belonging, about the price of standing tall in a world that preferred women bent. She thought about Dolores, bruised but unbroken, and Luke with his split knuckles and steady presence, about a town choosing sides and choosing hers. "He'll be back," she said again. "Maybe, probably." Luke stood, drawing her up with him. "But when he comes, he won't find you alone. He'll find you surrounded by people who've seen your worth, people who won't let anyone, no matter how rich or connected, make you small again." They walked back to the shop together, toward the crowd of neighbors already working to repair Thomas's damage. The sun climbed higher, warming the spring air, and Clara felt something ease in her chest. Not fear that would return, probably, in quiet moments. But for now, she had work to do, friends to thank, a life to rebuild. And beside her, matching her stride without thought, walked a man who'd bloodied his knuckles rather than let cruelty win, who saw battles as things to be shared, burdens as things to be carried together. Thomas could plan his return, could gather all the authority money could buy. But Clara had something worth more, a place where she belonged, people who claimed her, and a love that didn't ask her to be less than she was. It was, she thought, more than enough armor for whatever came next. The May Day market filled Cedar Falls' main square with colors and sounds that made the recent violence seem like a bad dream. Farmers brought early vegetables. Women displayed quilts and preserves, and children darted between the stalls like bright butterflies. Clara stood behind the dress shop's booth, Dolores seated beside her in a chair Luke had insisted on bringing. "Stop fussing," Dolores said for the 10th time. "I'm healed enough to sit at a market." But Clara noticed how the older woman tired more easily now. how her hands sometimes trembled on her needlework. The attack had stolen something from her, not her spirit, but perhaps her sense of safety. Clara understood. She'd felt that theft herself, long ago in Philadelphia. "Good morning, Miss Elliston." "Mrs." Weatherby approached the booth, and Clara braced for the usual coolness. But the woman's expression held something new, not warmth exactly, but respect. "I wondered if you might have time for a commission. My daughter's getting married come August." Clara blinked, surprised. "Of course, we'd be honored." "Good, Mrs." Weatherby's voice dropped. "What those men did to Dolores. Well, some of us may have been slow to welcome you, but we know right from wrong. You're part of Cedar Falls now. That means something." After she left, Dolores chuckled softly. "Never thought I'd see Prudence Weatherby bend that stiff neck of hers." "People can surprise you," Clara said, though she was as startled as Dolores. "Speaking of surprises," Dolores nodded toward the crowd. Luke was making his way through the market, but he wasn't alone. Judge Morrison walked beside him, the circuit judge. Not Doc Morrison, and both men wore serious expressions that made Clara's stomach tighten. "Ladies," Judge Morrison touched his hat. "Miss Elliston, might we have a word privately?" Clara glanced at Dolores, who waved her off. "Go on, I'll manage the booth." Luke led them to a quiet spot behind the livery stable, away from curious ears. Judge Morrison pulled out a leather portfolio, official-looking documents visible within. "I've reviewed your case," he began without preamble. "The abandonment is clear-cut. Your former husband publicly renounced the marriage and expelled you from the marital home. Under territorial law, that's grounds for immediate dissolution." Clara's heart began to race. "How immediate?" "I can grant the divorce today, if you're willing." He pulled out a document covered in legal language. "Sign here, and Clara May Elliston becomes a free woman. No ties to the past, no claims on your future." The pen felt heavy in Clara's hand. For so long, she'd carried the weight of that failed marriage like a stone. Now, with a few strokes of ink, she could set it down forever. She signed without hesitation. "There's more," Luke said quietly. "Tell her the rest." Judge Morrison's expression darkened. "Thomas Renshaw. He's been making inquiries in Cheyenne, trying to build a case against you. Moral turpitude, abandonment of wifely duties, corruption of local citizens, the usual nonsense men like him spout when they're bent on revenge." "Can he?" "No." The judge's voice was firm. "Not anymore. This divorce decree makes you a free citizen of Wyoming Territory, with all rights therein. Moreover," he pulled out another document. "Sheriff Coleman filed a formal complaint about the assault on Mrs. Abernathy. There's a warrant out for Renshaw if he sets foot in the territory again." Clara sagged with relief, and Luke's hand found the small of her back, steady and supporting. "It's not perfect protection," Judge Morrison warned. "Men like Renshaw have reach, but legally, you're as protected as the law can make you." After the judge left, Clara and Luke stood in the shade of the stable, processing what had just happened. She was free, truly, legally free. "You did this," she said. "The judge, the papers, all of it." "You did it," Luke corrected. "By being brave enough to start over, I just helped with the paperwork." Clara laughed, surprising them both. "Is that what we're calling it?" "Well, and maybe I mentioned to Judge Morrison that any man who'd send thugs after an elderly woman wasn't fit to breathe territorial air. Might have been less polite about it." Luke Carver, defending my honor. Defending what's right. He turned to face her fully. "Clara, you need to know something. Thomas sent more than just Briggs. He sent letters to every rancher in 3 counties, warning them against doing business with me. Claimed I was harboring a fallen woman, that my ranch was a den of impropriety." Clara's stomach dropped. "Oh, Luke, Your reputation is just fine." His smile was wry. "Turns out ranchers don't much care for Eastern dandies telling them who they can or can't respect. I've had more offers of help this week than in the past year. Jim Sullivan even offered to buy my cattle at premium if I needed quick cash to weather any trouble." "But why would they?" "Because they know me. Know you now, too. Know that Thomas Renshaw wouldn't recognize honor if it bit him on his expensively tailored backside." Luke caught her hands. "He tried to isolate us. Instead, he showed everyone exactly what kind of man he is, and what kind of woman you are." Clara thought about that as they walked back to the market. The crowd had grown, and she could see their booth doing steady business. Dolores chatting with customers while young Mary helped display goods. Normal, ordinary, beautiful in its simplicity. "There's something else," Luke said as they approached. "Something I've been waiting for the right time to say. But with everything that's happened—" "Luke?" He stopped walking, turning to face her in the middle of the square, seemingly oblivious to the people flowing around them. "I'm not good with words. Clara, you know that, but I need you to hear this." He took a breath, squaring his shoulders like a man facing a storm. "I love you, not despite your height or your history or your stubbornness. Because of it, because you're Clara May Elliston, who stands tall and speaks truth and makes broken things whole again." Clara's vision blurred. "Luke, I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. You just got free, I know that. But I needed you to know where I stand, where I've stood since probably that first night, if I'm honest." Around them, the market continued its cheerful chaos, but Clara felt suspended in amber, held in this moment of absolute clarity. Luke Carver loved her, had loved her through silence and violence, through whispers and wounds. Loved her not as a project to be fixed or a woman to be saved, but as herself. "I love you too," she said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. "I think I have for a while now. I was afraid to name it. Afraid it would disappear if I looked too close." "It won't." His hands came up to frame her face, thumbs gentle on her cheekbones. "I'm not going anywhere. Clara, not unless you send me." "Then you'll be waiting a very long time." Someone in the crowd whistled, probably one of the ranch hands, and Clara remembered they were standing in the middle of the town square. But when Luke smiled at her, bright and true as summer lightning, she found she didn't care who saw. "Miss Clara, Miss Clara!" Mary rushed up, breathless with excitement. "You need to come quick. Something wonderful's happened." They followed the girl back to the booth, where a crowd had gathered. In the center stood a well-dressed woman Clara didn't recognize. City Polish evident in every line of her traveling suit. "Are you Miss Elliston?" the woman asked. "The seamstress." "I am." "Wonderful." The woman clasped her hands together. "I'm Mrs. Adelaide Morrison, Judge Morrison's daughter-in-law, visiting from Denver. I've been admiring your work all morning. The detail, the construction, it's as fine as anything in the city shops." Clara glanced at Dolores, who was trying hard not to smile. "Thank you, ma'am. I run a dress shop in Denver, high-end clientele, very particular about quality. Mrs. Morrison fingered the christening gown Clara had embroidered. "I'd like to place an order, a substantial one, and perhaps discuss a regular arrangement your work, sold in Denver at city prices. You'd make 3 times what you charge here." The crowd murmured, impressed. Clara's mind raced. This was opportunity knocking the kind that could secure her future, establish her independence beyond question. I'd need to discuss it with my partner." She gestured to Dolores. "The shop is hers. Mine and yours," Dolores corrected firmly. "Has been for months now, in all but name, and I say yes, we say yes." "Mrs. Morrison beamed. "Excellent. I'll be in town through the weekend. We can work out the details." As the crowd dispersed, chattering excitedly, Clara sank onto Dolores's chair, Her head spun with the speed of change, divorce granted, love declared, future suddenly bright with possibility. "Quite a day," Dolores observed mildly. "The best day," Clara corrected, watching Luke help a customer load purchases into a wagon, his movements easy and familiar. "Even with Thomas's threats hanging over us, those will fade." Dolores patted her hand. "Men like him are like prairie storms, loud and destructive. But they pass. What remains is what we build after." That evening, as the market wound down, Clara stood before the crowd that had gathered at the courthouse steps. Sheriff Coleman had asked her to speak about the shop, about the attack, about moving forward. She'd tried to refuse, but Luke had encouraged her with quiet certainty. "They need to hear your voice, not mine, not Coleman's, yours." So she stood tall, shoulders back, and spoke simple truth. "3 months ago, I came to Cedar Falls with nothing but fear and $7. I expected suspicion. I expected rejection. What I didn't expect was kindness from strangers, work that mattered, and a community that would stand up for one of its own." She saw faces in the crowd, Mrs. Weatherby, nodding slowly, Mary, bright-eyed with hero worship, the ranch hands who'd helped rebuild the shop, and Luke, always Luke, steady as sunrise. "Thomas Renshaw thought he could drive me out with whispers and violence. He was wrong, because Cedar Falls doesn't abandon its people. We protect each other. We build each other up, and we don't let anyone, no matter how powerful, tell us we're less than we are." The applause started slowly, then built like thunder. Clara stood there, accepting it not as personal tribute, but as the town's declaration they were choosing community over fear, truth over gossip. Later, as twilight painted the sky purple, she and Luke walked toward the ranch. Dolores was safely ensconced with the Morrisons. The shop was locked tight, and Grace waited in her stall for evening treats. "Quite a speech," Luke said. "You've got a gift for words." "I just spoke the truth. That's the gift. Most folks dress truth up so fancy they lose it. You keep it clean and simple." He caught her hand, weaving their fingers together. "Like everything else about you." Clara smiled, thinking of all the complicated paths that had led to this simple moment, walking hand in hand with a man who saw her clearly and loved her anyway. Or perhaps because... "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Luke squeezed her hand. "Now we build. The shop, the ranch. Whatever future we choose, Thomas might come back, might not. Either way, we'll be ready. Together." Together. Such a simple word for such a profound promise. Clara had spent so long standing alone, holding herself apart. Now she had Luke, Dolores, a town that claimed her. She had work that mattered and love that didn't ask her to shrink. Tomorrow there would be orders to fill, a mare to train, a life to build piece by piece. But tonight, walking through spring air that smelled of possibilities, Clara May Elliston was exactly where she belonged, tall and proud, and finally, blessedly, home. The afternoon sun slanted through the tall windows Luke had promised, filling Clara's new sewing room with golden light. 6 months had passed since that day at the market. 6 months of building and growing and becoming. The ranch house now boasted an addition, not just a room, but a declaration of permanence, of futures intertwined. Clara sat at her cutting table, working on a wedding dress for the banker's daughter, when she heard familiar footsteps on the porch. Luke appeared in the doorway, hat in hand, wearing an expression she couldn't quite read. "We need to talk," he said quietly. Her hands stilled on the ivory silk. Those words, in her experience, rarely brought good news. "What's wrong?" "Nothing. Everything." He entered the room, moving with unusual hesitation. "Clara, I've been thinking." "Always dangerous," she said, trying for lightness despite the sudden tightness in her chest. Luke smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I built this room for you, been courting you proper for months. Everyone in town knows we're..." Whatever we are. Whatever we are. Clara set down her scissors carefully. Is that what's troubling you? That we don't have a name for this? Maybe. He moved to the window, looking out at the land that rolled toward distant mountains. Or maybe I'm troubled that we do have a name for it, but I'm too much a coward to speak it. Clara rose, crossing to stand beside him. In the pasture, Grace grazed peacefully, no longer the terrified mare from Thompson's stable. Time and patience had worked their magic there, as in so many other places. You're the least cowardly man I know, she said softly. Am I? Luke turned to face her. Then why does asking a simple question feel harder than facing down outlaws? Clara's heart began to race. What question? Instead of answering directly, Luke reached into his vest pocket, pulling out a small leather pouch. Found something when I was in Denver last week. Wasn't looking for it, but there it was, like it was waiting. He opened the pouch, spilling its contents into his palm. A ring gleamed there, not new, but beautiful in its simplicity. A small sapphire surrounded by seed pearls, set in silver that had been polished to softness by years of wearing. It was my grandmother's, Luke said quietly. She was tall for her time, strong-willed, never quite fit what people expected. Grandfather loved her for 53 years, until the day he died. She followed him a week later, said she'd waited long enough to see what came next. Clara couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. I know you just got free, Luke continued. Know you might not want to tie yourself down again, but Clara May Elliston, I need you to know I don't want to own you or change you or make you smaller. I want to stand beside you, build with you. Wake up every morning knowing you're choosing to stay. He went to one knee, there in the sewing room he'd built for her dreams, and held up the ring like an offering. Will you marry me, not because you need protection or respectability or any of those things people say women need, but because I love you, and I want the right to say it in front of God and everybody, because you make broken things whole, including me. Clara looked down at this man who'd paid for her room without asking for thanks, who'd created tears in his clothes so she could maintain dignity while mending them, who'd bloodied his knuckles rather than let cruelty win, who'd built her a room with windows facing east, exactly as he'd promised. Yes, she said simply, then louder, laughing through tears she hadn't felt coming. Yes, Luke Carver, of course, yes. His hands shook slightly as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting all these years for her hand. When he stood, Clara kissed him there in the afternoon light, pouring into it all the words she didn't have gratitude and joy, and a love that felt as vast as the prairie sky. When? He asked when they finally pulled apart. Soon. Clara surprised herself with the certainty. I've waited long enough to be happy. They were married 2 weeks later, on a Sunday afternoon that couldn't decide between summer and fall. The whole town turned out, filling the church and spilling onto the lawn. Dolores stood as Clara's witness, fully healed and beaming like a proud mother. Judge Morrison performed the ceremony, his words carrying extra weight given all he'd done to make this day possible. Clara wore a dress of her own, making soft blue silk that brought out her eyes, cut to flatter her height rather than hide it. When she walked down the aisle, she didn't slouch or shrink. She stood tall, meeting Luke's eyes over the heads of their neighbors, their friends, their chosen family. Do you, Clara May, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Judge Morrison asked. I do. The words came out strong and clear. Nothing like the whispered promise she'd made years ago in Philadelphia. This was choice, freely made and gladly given. Do you, Luke Samuel, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? Every day for the rest of my life, Luke said, which wasn't the traditional response but was so perfectly him that Clara laughed even as tears slipped down her cheeks. When Judge Morrison pronounced them married, when Luke kissed her there in front of everyone, the church erupted in applause, but Clara barely heard it. Her whole world had narrowed to this moment, Luke's hands gentle on her face, his lips soft against hers, the absolute rightness of standing here with him. The reception filled the church grounds with music and laughter. Tables groaned under the weight of donated dishes, everyone contributing to the celebration. Mary from the inn had made a cake 3 layers high, decorated with sugar roses that rivaled Clara's embroidery for delicacy. The ranch hands had strung lanterns in the trees, preparing for dancing that would last until dawn. "Happy?" Luke asked during a quiet moment, his arm around her waist as they watched their guests enjoying themselves. "More than I knew was possible," Clara admitted. "I keep waiting for something to go wrong, for Thomas to appear, or—" "Stop!" Luke turned her to face him. "This is our day, our life. Thomas Renshaw doesn't get to cast shadows here." He was right, of course. Clara had spent too long looking over her shoulder, waiting for the past to catch up. But here, now, surrounded by people who'd chosen to celebrate with them, she could let that go, could trust that the future they were building was stronger than old threats. As if summoned by thought, Sheriff Coleman approached, looking pleased with himself. "Got a wedding present for you folks," he said, handing Luke an envelope. "Came by special courier yesterday." Luke opened it, Clara reading over his shoulder. It was from a law firm in Philadelphia. Formal language wrapped around simple news: Thomas Renshaw had been arrested for embezzlement. His father's company had discovered years of theft, carefully hidden until Thomas's recent absences had prompted closer scrutiny. He faced prison time, disgrace, the loss of everything he'd valued above human kindness. "Well," Clara said quietly, "I suppose that's that." "Good riddance," Dolores added, appearing at Clara's elbow with a glass of punch. "Though I'd have preferred to see him get a taste of frontier justice." "This is better," Clara decided, handing the letter back to Coleman. "He's facing the loss of what he loved most, money and reputation. Let the law have him." The band struck up a waltz, and Luke led her onto the makeshift dance floor. Clara had worried about dancing. Her height made it awkward with most partners. But Luke was tall enough, sure enough, and they moved together as naturally as breathing. "No more looking backward," he murmured against her ear. "From here on, we look forward." "What do you see when you look forward?" Clara asked. "You. Always you." His hand tightened on her waist. "Maybe some little ones who'll be too tall for their age and too stubborn for their own good. A ranch that prospers. A dress shop that becomes famous across the territory. Sunday dinners with too many people around the table. Getting old together. Sitting on that porch I'm going to build you. Watching sunsets and remembering when we were young and scared and brave enough to choose each other anyway." Clara's vision blurred again. "But these were good tears. Clean tears. That's a lot to see." "I've got good eyes." Luke spun her, making her laugh. "Especially when it comes to you." The party continued late into the night, but eventually Clara and Luke slipped away, riding toward the ranch under a canopy of stars. The house waited for them, windows glowing with lamplight Mary had promised to set before they arrived. Home. Their home. As Luke helped her down from the wagon, Clara noticed something different about the front door. A new sign hung there. Carved wood painted with careful letters. The Carver Ranch, Luke and Clara. Established 1882. "When did you—" "This morning." Luke looked almost shy. "Wanted it ready when we came home." Home. The word settled into Clara's bones like heat from a good fire. She'd been searching for home since leaving Philadelphia. Maybe before that. Had thought it was a place, a building, a geography. But standing here with Luke's arm around her, their names linked in carved wood, she understood the truth. Home wasn't a place. It was a person who saw you clearly and chose you anyway. It was work that mattered and friends who stood firm. It was the freedom to be exactly who you were. No more and certainly no less. "What are you thinking?" Luke asked as they stood on their porch, reluctant to go inside and end this perfect day. Clara turned in his arms, marveling at how far they'd come from that night at Holbrook's Inn. A desperate woman with $7 and nowhere to go. A quiet cowboy who'd paid for her room and asked for nothing but time. "I'm thinking," she said slowly, "that you asked for time that first night. Do you remember?" "Every word." "You said you wanted nothing except maybe some time with me." Clara touched his face, feeling the roughness of stubble, the warmth of skin. "How much time were you hoping for?" Luke's smile was answer enough, but he gave her words too, because he knew she needed them. All of it. Every minute you're willing to give. 50 years, 60, whatever we get, it won't be enough, but I'll take it grateful. Clara kissed him then, there on the porch of their ranch, under stars that had witnessed harder times and would witness better ones. When they finally went inside, closing the door on the world, she knew with bone-deep certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. Not despite her height or her history or her hard-won independence, but because of them, because every struggle had led her here, to this man who'd offered shelter without strings and love without limits. In the lamplit quiet of their bedroom, as Luke held her close and whispered promises against her skin, Clara thought about the journey that had brought them together, about fear transformed into courage, loneliness into belonging, charity into love, about second chances and patient hands and the revolutionary act of accepting someone exactly as they were. Tomorrow would bring work and challenges. The dress shop would grow. Orders from Denver would pour in. There might be children, as Luke hoped, tall and stubborn and beloved. There would certainly be storms. Prairie weather was nothing if not unpredictable. But tonight, Clara May Elliston Carver was simply a woman in love, held by a man who'd waited patiently for her to believe she deserved happiness, who'd shown her, day by day and choice by choice, that some things were worth the time they took to bloom. And as she drifted towards sleep, safe in Luke's arms, Clara smiled, because he'd been right that first night, though neither of them had known it then. All he'd wanted was time with her, and now they had a lifetime to share. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where in the world you're enjoying these tales from the American frontier. Please share in the comments below if this story touched your heart. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850. Give this video a like and hit the hype button to help more people discover these stories of love, courage, and redemption from the Old West. Your support means everything.